We've got the doctor on. Yeah, Rory's here. Hey, Rory, good to see you, man.
Hey, bud, how are you?
What are we talking about today? Concussion?
I think with winter sports, that's probably a good one to talk about.
Absolutely. Well, what the thing that comes to mind is some concussion, which really baffles me. Some concussions, they happen at the time. I mean, you must be plenty of sports stuff going on, but certainly there's a lot of violence going around too. But it doesn't take effect for days later. What's all that about?
Well, we've got a parlance of saying in medicine that if you've seen one concussion, you've seen one concussion. The gist of it is, well, they've always said how to consider concussion to be a brain injury. And from where we were taught, it's a acceleration deceleration force. So you get a knock on the head, it's bruising of the brain on the inside against the inside of the skull, and basically whatever things the brain controls can be affected. Obviously, that's everything. The man on the street generally thinks of a concussion as you were knocked out cold, but that isn't always the case. You know, something good enough or fast enough just to rattle you and get you a little bit confused and dazed and out of it is good enough as well. And I think
that's me every day. So if I had concussion,
I know that.
Okay.
Well, you need a brain first, right?
Well, my peanut occasionally gets sore, but look, let's get back into it. What signs do we look for?
So essentially, there's the injury itself. You know, you need to have had a knock. Sometimes not all that much, and certainly there are things that can affect that. If you've had concussions in the past, the force needed to bring on those symptoms again is much lower. And usually there's a whole lot of sideline things that people look at. You know, how quickly you respond, are you orientated, is a lot of those things. It's a bit of a minefield to get into, but usually you'll get a sense that that person just isn't quite there. They're nauseated, they may be vomiting, they may be unsteady on their feet, they may struggle to focus, visual issues, and a whole gamut of things. Like I said, you can run through a list of things that are there. Obviously, if a person has been knocked unconscious during a sporting event, well, that's a no-go. I mean, that they're off the field and that's done.
Makes it hard for you, Rory. Imagine someone fronts to you with all sorts of symptoms and you rattled off almost everything and anything.
Well, it's the gamut of things, but also the history. You know, if they come in and, I mean, I've seen patients recently who have been assaulted and they come in because they're feeling kind of light headache and they're not quite there. They're a bit spaced out and fatigued. And those symptoms fit. And it's very much a question of seeing how things go and having a plan in place for the next couple of days. I mean, you get concussion and you get concussion. And I mean, both of those, even the light ones, need to be taken seriously. I mean, there's a whole separate issue about sport, return to sport, avoiding contact, stand down periods. But there's the other side of, hey, look, how long does a concussion normally last? And that depends. There's usually, if they're all mild, the symptoms might be gone within, you know, a good week or so, or less sometimes. We have concern, obviously, if things don't stick around, or sorry, let me rephrase that, if they do stick around longer than that. And there's concussion clinics that you can attend. Usually that's beyond 7 to 10 days, generally after the 10-day period. It's worth looking at neurorehabilitation and checking those things out.
So, Rory, if I had a bang in the head at home, you know, like I walked into the wardrobe door or something stupid, or somebody whacked the door open and hit my head. Now I don't see stars, but shake my head and my God, that hurt. And you come up with a bit of a, what do you guys call it? Not a melanoma, hematoma. Is that time to run off to the doctor or just wait and see what manifests?
Very good question. I always say, look, for me, when it comes to head injury, there are two things in play. There's the injury itself, so the cuts, the bumps, the bruises, the broken bones, that's the physical stuff. And then it's the stuff that can happen later. Now, those, again, break down into two. You've got concussion, which is the brain bruising and all the behavioral, you know, constitutional symptoms. And then you've got the things that can be life-threatening. And luckily, we don't see it all that often, but it is never something that's far from our mind. That's what we call a subdural hematoma. So that's basically when you've had enough force to cause bleeding on the inside of your skull. And the problem with that is it doesn't stop. It is generally very slow. And as time goes on, that bleeding just builds up, but it's got nowhere to go except to fight for space with the brain. your brain loses that battle, and that pressure forces your brainstem down your spinal column, or we call that herniation.
Wow,
And
really?
that can kill you. So, well, you're old enough to remember nursery rhymes. So it's raining, it's pouring, the old man is snoring.
Yeah.
Went to bed, bumped his head, and didn't get up in the morning. Well, that was written about that condition. So,
Was it? Oh my goodness.
These
Didn't
can
realize
present
that.
late, and generally it's always what we see. A lot of kids with head injuries, especially, they've walked off, they've lost their footing, they've bumped themselves, they've come in with a big egg, and parents need advice. And a lot of the times it's completely harmless, but because they don't know what to look for, what to worry about, they approach us. And the advice normally, hey, look, once you've done a thorough examination, you're obviously concerned or not concerned, as the case may be. The facts that we generally share with them is it can be delayed, but in those who develop it, 95% of them will happen in the first 24 hours. That's usually your big worrying period. And the 3 warning signs are pretty obvious. So if you think about it yourself, if you've got this developing clot in your head, it's going to hurt. That pressure is going to cause pain. So usually the climbing headache, like worst splitting headache of your life, severe pain, that's a reason to get back. The second one, and that's a physiological reaction. With increased intracranial pressure, you'll start vomiting. And 1 or 2 episodes more, most people with a head injury will have vomited at some point. So if that has happened, usually it's worthwhile getting checked out. But obviously, if it's sustained or repetitive, that's another one. And the third is concerning more for the people who are on their own, because they won't notice this. And that's a dropping level of consciousness as that pressure shoots through the roof. And that's usually why we'll say to parents, look, if we're really, really, really worried about the kid, they're off to Starship. And often they'll be either CT'd to make sure that it's not developing, or if it's not looking all that bad, but they're not really good enough to be at home, they'll be kept there for a period of neuro observation to see, hey, look, are their vitals deteriorating, their alertness, what's happening with them. But often if it's not, we'll say to parents, look, if you're concerned, let them go to bed at normal time. When you go to bed, check in on them. And if you want to, you can wake up yourself and just see how you go. But yeah, head injuries, especially in kids, it's a huge thing.
Good on you, Rory. I mean, there's more words of wisdom from our doctor.
Yeah,
Look,
thanks,
I think
man.
that's
I
really
appreciate
important.
you letting me talk.
Well, don't normally get away with it until I'm on this video. Is that true?
Yeah, man, no worries.
Motor Mouth Max, he takes over. But look, good to see you, Rory. And look, those little gems of advice you're giving are really, really helpful. So thank you, my friend. We'll see you next week.
You're welcome, buddy. Have a good week.